opportunity to thank everyone for joining us. As I'm looking at the participation list, it looks like we already have over 200 participants. So I want to thank those folks who have taken time to join this evening. Of course, thank our board members for taking time and being part of this evening's meeting. I also seen a lot of familiar faces in our community, Terry, etc. A lot of folks have their screens hidden, but just want to thank you also for joining us this evening. I know this is very important to our parents, our family. You should also know that our staff was on earlier. You should also know that our staff, we had a meeting with our staff earlier this afternoon at around 2 o'clock. Over 800 participants in that call. As you might imagine, there were a lot of questions, concerns about trying to keep our children safe on a daily basis, and wanted to be assured that we had the appropriate strategies in place to make that happen. And so, we certainly going to take their feedback and try to incorporate that in the plan and our practice when we open up schools. So I was just thinking maybe we can get this another minute and see if we can just try to get settled, and I'll kind of provide an overview for you for this evening's meeting. Started. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Walston, the Assistant Superintendent here in Danbury. This is my second year in district, and I'm happy to be number one here in district and happy to also call Danbury home. Like many of you, the cabinet and I, the team, the teachers, the administrators, everyone is eager to get back to school, get back to work, and be in front of your children, but we also want to make sure we're doing that safely. To that end, you should know, you're probably aware the state is requiring, or has required, that all of our schools reopen fully in the fall. And given the our reality regarding overcrowding, and the guidelines around social distancing, our superintendent, Dr. Sal, has pushed our cabinet, and so we pushed a letter to the governor's office, to our commissioner, requesting some flexibility on that plan. And so you will note, in our reentry plan is actually a sample letter that we sent to the state, requesting, quite frankly, some type of modification to reopening schools. And in fact, we outlined a scenario in which our schools would be open in some type of hybrid model, in which 50% of the kids would go a couple of days a week. Then a different cohort of students would go to school different days a week, and then we have one day in the middle in which our schools would be cleaned and disinfected. As of right now, we do not have any official word regarding that request, and we've been encouraged to submit a plan with the intention to open up fully in the fall. So we're going to continue to work under that expectation, but please know that as a district, we are hoping to get an approval to come back on some type of modified plan. So just yes,
Okay.
Dr. Sal, is that you?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I couldn't get on before.
Awesome. They wouldn't unmute the superintendent. Sorry about that.
They wouldn't unmute me. They try. So I know you want to go through the presentation. We have 257.
Yes, we're growing. Yes.
Just terrific. So thank you for taking the time. We said we would come back when we had more information, more explicit. We do, but I do want to just make this point to you. And I've been getting emails from folks and from teachers and from parents and even students. We're concerned. I'm concerned. You're concerned. There's a lot of discussion regarding what's safe, unsafe. Is it unsafe for adults? Is it more unsafe for youngsters? These are all, narratives that are playing out there. My narrative is simple. We're trying to start next year. And I can tell you it's not normal, it's abnormal. That's not a great revelation. I can tell you for certainty that we have to invest in a few things. Sanitation is going to be extremely important. We're trying to get extra custodial help during the day to keep washrooms cleaned and just areas that are frequent by the adults or students, so that remains clean. We will limit, obviously, those individuals coming into the school to emergency cases only, to limit and protect the school children as best we can. I will say that there's a lot of anxiety trying to accomplish this distancing as prescribed by the experts. Now we're talking 3 to 6 feet. So, it looks, in our case, going back full time, the 3 foot is more of the reality, and that's moving much of the materials out of classrooms. The corners that we love so much where youngsters read to the teacher and things of that nature may not be present, not until we get this thing under control. So these things are bothersome, very bothersome to me. That's why, going into the hybrid model, allowing much greater distance, possibly permitting, if it's more than 6 feet, that the youngsters can take these masks off to have them on all day. And it's very difficult. We don't have air conditioning. These are all things that have been keeping me up at night. So, for many reasons, along with the COVID-19, it seems the state's relegated into phase 2 or they're hybrid only when it comes to the COVID. In our situation, it really is the practicality of what we have and a growing school district that does not have the space to make it into an environment we feel is the best conducive for our youngsters. So the sanitation is very important. But I will say the certainty we have will be distance learning next year, no matter if it's hybrid or partially on the full distance learning. You're going to hear today, parents are going to give them the opportunity to petition distance learning. Um, so we want to make sure that we create the best case scenario with distance learning. So we're going to invest highly in that. We're going to invest in the sanitation and mitigation strategies, devices for youngsters, sun partitions, things of that nature that we need to make sure that when we do return, whether it's full time or hybrid, we're going to have to utilize that. So I don't want to take too much time. There's a lot of things on my mind. I want to just say to you, as I promised, we will create the safest environment as I can. I am working hand in hand with your mayor, Mayor Boughton, to petition the state to please permit us to do the hybrid for many, many reasons. And have not heard back yet, but I'm certain we'll hear something hopefully very soon. With that, Kevin, maybe you can go through the presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sal. And so just a quick overview of the meeting for this evening. Certainly want to walk you through an overview of the reentry plan. And please, after this meeting, the plan will be on the website in its current state until the board meeting when we make those final adjustments. So please find an opportunity to read in more detail about the plan. The overview that I'm going to be sharing with you are kind of highlights representative of the expectations and the requirements from the state. Next on the agenda, we have, and Dr. Mead is going to put a link into the chat box. And so in your window, you'll see an icon for chat. And if you select that link, I'm sorry, if you select that box, you will see a link in there shortly. Once you select that, it will be a Google Sheet. And in that Google document, there will be an area where it says category, and then another space where it's question. And so what we are looking to do as a district, because we understand, recognize, acknowledge that you might have a lot of questions for us or concerns. And so for us, that space will be the opportunity to record those questions. The frequently asked questions we will add as an addendum to the plan and have some responses to make sure we've answered them for the community. And then last but not least, we'll circle back to the superintendent and ask him to close out the meeting, okay? And can you confirm that you have that link in there?
It is there and it's working.
Okay, thank you, Ann.
Into it, yeah.
And so let me just get started and just say that this presentation identifies the critical requirements needed for each district to submit a reopening plan. The guidance that we're following is from the Connecticut School Reopening Plan, Adapt, Advance, and Achieve. This was released June 24th, I believe it was. And from that guidance, Danbury Public Schools and other districts around the state began to put their plans together given that guidance. And so some of the specific requirements are on the next few slides. It maintains that every school opening plan should be designed with clear and um, specific mitigating strategies, and make sure that we address each critical requirement. And so on our next page of the PowerPoint, those critical requirements are going to be listed, and it's going to kind of help guide the presentation. But you'll also find, when you look deeper into the plan is also laid out per each requirement. And so Dr. Sal had alluded to this earlier. Some of the priorities from the state is that all students should be returning to school full-time in the fall. And so as long as the public health data continues to support this model, we'll be back in school at up to full capacity. In the event there are any changes in COVID-19 instances or occurrences in the community, we could be moved to a hybrid model in which only 50% of our students are allowed to come in school. And then if the cases continue to increase, as per the health department, we could be moved to full distance learning. But the expectation is that, as of right now anyway, is that we would start full-time instruction up to 100% of our students. And so some of those sections that are required in this plan is that we have some specific mitigation strategies relative to transportation, food services, extracurricular activities, childcare, answers for social emotional support, mitigation strategies for facilities and operations, making sure we've provided one-to-one devices for all of our students, and found ways to ensure that our families had access and connectivity. Began to walk through what the academic experience would be like for all of our students, our teachers, and our staff and our families. And then also, and most importantly, as per a lot of the feedback that we're receiving, addressing the health and wellness of all of our students and staff and families, and then making sure we have a plan for school, family-school partnerships, and continuing to connect with our families in the community through this effort. And so I'll start with bus and transportation. Some of these are requirements, others are considerations. And so to begin with, it is required that all of our students and staff have face coverings on the bus. And certainly, and for our parents in particular, encouraging social distancing that pick up and drop off points in the community. These are not things we had to worry about in the past, but it's certainly going to be important that we maintain social distance when we're away from school as well. We've had a number of conversations with our transportation department, and we'll have protocols in place where we are intensifying cleaning protocols and disinfecting protocols on our buses. And soon we'll be talking about this later on in the plan, where we'll be asking feedback from our community. I believe we've already surveyed you at least one time, trying to get feedback from you and seeing if you had an appetite for, having your kids take advantage of school transportation, or might you be driving your kids to school yourself? And then, of course, if we have an increased number of parents deciding to drive their students to school, this certainly helps us on the buses with social distancing, but it also causes a challenge on the other side with increased traffic in the schools. So part of our considerations and things we'll be looking at is, number one, certainly working with our safety advocates and training them on best practice to help with traffic flow, but also reviewing and exploring the idea of hiring additional crossing guards to help to help manage that. So certainly a big issue for us is trying to figure out how we're going to feed students in a social distance environment. And on a full day, this continues to be a challenge for us as we, walk through the different scenarios. But some things that are certainly non-negotiable, and that is that we'll continue to have to follow our nutritional safety guidelines. But throughout this model, whatever model we look to implement, we'll look to design classroom delivery models for younger students, in which we would figure out how maybe we can deliver class foods to classrooms, maximize social distances as much as possible during lunch period. This could be in the cafeteria, this could be in classrooms. It's really dependent on the school, and so we're very mindful of the gathering guidelines, provided by the state. But at the same time, we also have some capacity issues with supervision in classrooms, so that staff can also have an opportunity to have their own lunch. And so we will be figuring that out. And in some schools, we'll be able to use the cafeteria and social distance. And then at the same time, in some schools, we may not be able to use the cafeteria at all. And so, we'll continue, depending on the school, it's certainly school specific, but we will be exploring all of those things. Certainly, we'll be providing grab and go meals. And again, whether that's in the classroom, cafeteria, throughout a school campus, that will be a priority for us. Where applicable, we will have cashless, touchless point of sale transactions. We're still exploring exactly what that food exchange is going to look like. But in any case, we will have grab and go meals, so that we don't have a congregation of students at lunch counters. And where possible, we'll be looking to stagger lunch schedules as much as possible to reduce the number of students in the cafeteria or in any space for that matter in the school. And so we know we have a lot of athletes in the school community and a lot of students who participate in extracurricular activities. A couple of weeks ago, we had a town hall meeting in which, some of our students, they reminded us how important it was, whatever model we choose, that we maintain their school experience, to the best of our ability. And so we will absolutely continue to have extracurricular activities. But we also have to do that in a safe manner. And so the CIAC has already released guidelines for athletes, that has already started and has been implemented, effective July 1st. So for those of you who are aware or may not be aware, some of our athletes have already come back into school campus. In many cases, they've been encouraged as part of the phase one, and that is working with their coaches in a virtual way and working on conditioning. And then a different phase was they were starting to come into the school in cohorts and begin to work out and work on conditioning. And those cohorts have been increased, and more students are coming back, in a safe manner with being mindful of social distancing guidelines. Also, any equipment, whether that's workout equipment, whatever that might be, procedures for shared equipment, and making sure those things are well sanitized, and making sure they're coming up with a system to make that happen. And just going back to after school care and before school care, we will be working with those programs and surveying the community, seeing what the interest in and participation in those programs, and make sure we have adequate staffing before and after school. And then, of course, the expectation is that staff will be expected to implement the same procedures that we happen during the school day. And so social emotional support for our students and our staff has been a priority for us. And training will be a priority for us to open up the school year. As you probably aware, at our board meeting in June, we implemented a new district calendar, in which we grouped more days at the beginning of the year for training for staff. And then most recently, we were just informed, I believe it was as late as yesterday, or 2 days ago, where instead of the 180-day expectation, it is now only 177-day expectation. And the expectation is districts can use those additional 3 days for preparation and planning with staff. And so I mention that because this will help give us even more time for our staff to receive the training that they'll need to implement trauma-informed professional development for everyone. making sure our staff has an opportunity to get acquainted or get reacquainted with their space, which will certainly look different when they come back. Dr. Sal mentioned earlier that if we're going to be able to get into these classrooms within those guidelines, classrooms are going to look very different. And so we've had an architect give us some feedback on how those classrooms would have to be reconfigured to make sure we can get up to 20, 22 students, 24 students in a classroom, which in our case would mean removing a lot of other furniture to make that happen. Going back to the social emotional support, we will be planning to work with staff in the beginning of the year, and part of that priority, part of that priority will be to plan experiences to ensure that schools um, place place student wellness first by establishing positive, safe, and supportive learning environment. And so in our elementary schools, that could mean morning meeting. That can mean, sitting down and working with students, talking about their day, their weekend, talking about feelings. But it's really more about non-academic focused check-ins with students and making sure we have a plan at every school to make sure this has happened in a systemic way. At the same time, we'll also be working with our administrators to do something similar with staff, recognizing how important this is for everyone during these times. And then you'll also see at the bottom, for staff, and it's important, I think, that that we'll be looking to make sure we support our staff so that they can be in front of your children and so that they have the support that they need. And so an employee assistance program will be available to them for any support they might need outside of the constructs of the school day. And so facilities and operations, this one was a big one for us. We need to ensure that all of our schools meet high cleanliness and disinfectant standards prior to the reopening of school, and we'll certainly be doing that. We've been working with our operations department. Classrooms have been cleaned early in the school year, given that we didn't have students in the building. That has provided opportunities for us to begin to move extraneous kind of furniture from classrooms so that we can adhere to these guideline expectations. And those expectations, Dr. Sal mentioned earlier, the the American Academy of Pediatrics has released guidelines recently that suggest that 3 to 6 feet, that being socially distanced within 3 to 6 feet will certainly help us mitigate the spread of the disease. And so we will be using those guidelines to help develop and put in place. To put the architect together for our classrooms, and we'll be working with and have worked with the health department and our school nurse as we put these classrooms together. Certainly, there will be plans in place for appropriate social distancing within the classrooms, but also in our hallways at arrival and dismissal, and in common areas. And so this is why, we're mindful of the rules around, large gatherings. And so, the typical traffic rules that we have when driving will be implemented when walking in the hallways on the right side of the hallway, looking at stairways and see if we can have just upstairs and downstairs so kids are not making face-to-face contact. And last but not least for this page, reviewing and looking at, because we're mindful that also that windows are going to have to be open, doors will have to be propped open for appropriate ventilation within our classrooms. We've also been informed recently that we will not be able to use fans at this time because that just further will compromise our classrooms. And so, we'll certainly be working with staff to make sure windows and doors are open for appropriate ventilation in our spaces. And so I had mentioned this earlier, but technology and access is another big item for us. We worked really hard before the year closed out to make sure we supplied students with Chromebooks before the year ended. We have an inventory on hand in the event of damage and loss of stolen devices, but also a plan to supply any new students to the district with Chromebooks as well. Of course, the district will be provided a model in which all students will transport devices safely to and from school. Our academic plan when we come back to school will require an ongoing ongoing plan that will continue with a component in which students will continue to be engaged, whether we're fully back in school or not, or in a hybrid. The expectation will be teachers and students will still engage virtually in the lab with the Chromebook. And so, as part of the expectation, students will be bringing those devices to and from school, and we'll look exploring plans to make sure that could be done safely, because we want to mitigate any accidents or issues with broken devices. And last but not least, of course, we continue to work with families. We'll continue to survey families on whether or not they have adequate wireless internet access, and ensuring that everyone has a one-to-one device. As a community, we have to prepare to make sure that in the event where we have a resurgence in the community and we're back to full-time distance learning, that everyone is connected if and when that happens. And so health and wellness, of course, for us is an important area for us. We've received a lot of feedback through our thought exchange and also from our surveys, our community, our teachers, our families expressing concern about this area. So families should know that in the event there is a confirmed case in one of our schools, or if our students or staff for that matter are experiencing any of these symptoms, um, as per the state, we not only have to have a nurse's office in every building, but we also have to have a designated isolation room. And so, in that isolation room, staff and students will be monitored by a school nurse. Students certainly, they will be reviewed and monitored, and the expectation is we will have to, and as part of our partnership with families, the expectation is, we will need our families to come pick up their children immediately. Certainly another expectation for our families is that they are also doing their typical screenings before they send their children to school. And so if they have a fever, if they're having any of the symptoms of COVID-19 or common cold, we are we're encouraging families to keep their children at home. Of course, we're doing the same thing and requesting the same of staff. You should also know that as part of we're going to have to be, we're not going to have a choice but to be really strict with our visitation policy. And so I know for some of our families, particularly our younger parents who have in years past who have come into the building to drop their families off, principals would be working with you to come up with a protocol where you're dropping your students, your kids off at the door, because, and again, to help mitigate the spread of COVID, we will not be allowed to have visitors inside the school. And so, in the event of a positive case in the school, the superintendent and the health department, including our district nurse, we will be communicating with the community. And so, if a teacher, a staff member, or a member of the household is tested positive for COVID-19, immediately contact tracing will be put in place. And with contact tracing, for those of you who are not aware, it's literally tracing. And so it's, one of our students appears to has contacted COVID-19. Their parent may have been exposed, and then all the other students who have been around this student, we would have to identify and reach out to those families, any other staff members that may have come in contact with this student, or it could be a staff member. In any case, we would have a responsibility to inform families, and then that also triggers another response. And so, in a district, we kind of have a decision tree around these decisions. We work with the health department. We work with our district nurse. We confirm if there is a case. And if there is a case, there's a procedure in which we have to determine whether or not we're closing down classrooms. We have to determine whether or not we're closing down the school for a couple of days, or we determine whether or not we have to close down the district for a couple of days. And right now, the guidance suggests that you close the school down for 2 to 5 days, assess, make sure you communicate to your families, and then after that assessment, determine whether or not you're going to be isolated and quarantined for 14 days, or it's safe to come back to school. And again, those decisions will be made with our district nurse and our local health department. Before I go into the next page, our district plan is not only kind of set up in a way where it highlights all of the expectations, but it's really set up as a checklist. And so one of those checklist items is to make sure we have adequate PPE equipment in place for our staff, and then make sure we have backup materials, in the event someone forgets their PPE equipment, whether that's students or staff. So that's going to be very important for us. Some of the questions that were also asked, if we have students who don't have them, or if we have students who refuse to wear them, then make sure we have something in place, protocols in place to make sure those things are in place, make sure that they're worn at all times. And certainly we will be working with our families to make sure that their children understand this expectation, because it's going to be important to ensure the safety of all of us. And just a continuation of health and awareness, health and wellness. The superintendent of schools has a procedure in place for the closure of schools for the length of time based on a positive case of COVID-19. And of course, as part of that assessment, we'll be looking at the risk level within the school, the community, and that will be determined by the local health officials. And that was something that I was alluding to earlier. These are the things that help inform that decision. Something that I did not mention earlier, but I want to make sure I make this clear. Certainly, the district has a team, as we develop this plan, but this plan gets further looked at and reviewed at every single school, and so there'll be an expectation that every principal has a leadership team that also has an implementation team, because as mentioned earlier, just the delivery of food alone will look different from school to school based on how the building is resourced, and the population of the school, and just what the capacity is for lunch, et cetera. And so every principal, we will be working with every school individually to come up with, to put a team together, number one, but then make sure that they have a plan to respond and make sure they have protocols in place, consistent with the district plan that we put in place. So family and school partnerships, again, I know I had mentioned this in the opening, but it's going to be important for us to remain connected to our parents and to the community during this time. And so you might recall prior to this year, the school ending, there were ongoing communications with our families. And although we hope we're not going to be closed again anytime soon, we certainly acknowledge the need to stay in constant communication. And so you should expect ongoing communications as we reopen schools as well. And so I know many of you are wondering what the models for learning are going to look like in the fall. What is school going to look like in the fall? What are the options that are going to be before us in the fall? And so before I go into detail about this page, I just want to make you aware, and I will refer back to again, make you aware that we will be sharing a survey with you as soon, and probably no later than Monday or Tuesday next week. In that survey / program selection, we're going to start asking families, and the survey will be available for 3 weeks to a month. But we will be asking families to, with the information that they have right now, to begin to make a commitment about the program they want their child to participate in for next school year. We need this information to begin to inform our staffing decisions. And so the two areas that you see reflected right now, in-person learning and distance learning, we essentially have to plan for a district of two different systems. And so if all of our students are going back in the fall, we also recognize, and I'll start here, our families, you have the option of choosing between having your child come to school full-time, or you have the choice of having your students participate in school through distance learning, which looks different for K-5 and 6-12, and I'll explain further. But if you're choosing to have your child in-person learning, you should also know, and this can help inform your decision, in the survey you will be asked, are you looking to have your kid participate in school learning, in-person learning? If the answer is yes, please also know this is a traditional schedule with health and safety expectations, as we had went through in the PowerPoint. Students would be expected to attend every day with all state guidelines and expectations in place. Classroom learning and instructional activities are adjusted, certainly, i.e. Social distancing. The classroom may not look the same as it has in years past. And here's something that I was alluding to earlier, and I think this is a very important point for all of us to keep in mind. Although we will be in-person learning, we will maintain our digital and blended connections because it's going to be important and because otherwise we will not be ready for a move to a hybrid model or a move to a distance learning. And I just want to talk about hybrid model. Um, should there be an increase in the number of cases in the community, we may have to either move to either a hybrid model 2 days a week or 3 days, 2 days a week in person and 3 days a week distance learning. And so going back how we opened up, talking about some students coming in on Monday, Tuesday, another group of students coming on Thursday, Friday, Wednesdays off for, additional disinfecting and cleaning. Or if there's an increase in the number of cases in the community, we could be in full distance learning. In this model, special education students and bilingual students can be invited in person up to 4 days per week in the hybrid model, not the distance learning model. But just being mindful that if we are in the hybrid, we may have to prioritize those populations, or certainly as we invite students in a hybrid, they would be part of our priority as we invite students in as per the state plan. Um, and so the first choice is in-person learning. The second choice is distance learning. Distance learning, students and parents engage in distance learning with materials and support from the school. This is a blend of synchronous and asynchronous learning. And so that's in person, where there's someone, watching, is working with you on the screen in person, but they also may be learning activities in which the teacher is not there in front of you. So there will be a cohort of distance learning that is voluntary. If you select this voluntary option, there will be an August cohort that will start, and they will. We are recommending that if you choose this selection, that you stay in that model for at least one semester. And so, in the next page is just a little bit more about your program choices and kind of what this looks like. So, just kind of review. Should there be an increase in the number of COVID cases in the community, we may be required to move to full-time distance learning regardless of what plan you choose. I just want to be clear about that. Again, going from left to right, if you choose in person, that is a traditional model, and we will continue to maintain the digital and blended connections. In the event that the community, there is an increase in COVID cases in the community, we could move to a hybrid model, but that's still in person. So that's why we're calling that one choice. The second choice is distance learning, and that's all the way to the right. And in a distance learning model at the K-5 level, this would mean full-time remote learning from home, in which a Danbury teacher will be assigned to deliver instruction using our standardized content. And then at the 612 level, this would mean that students will be assigned digital courses using a computer-based platform. And students will work independently in a self-paced learning that mirrors their current schedule as closely as possible. And so, and you should also be aware, and I know Dr. Sal had mentioned this earlier. We have petitioned to the state to start the school year in a hybrid model. Not to be confused, a hybrid model is not an option, as specifically as a standalone. We have petitioned to the state to start with entering schools at 50% capacity versus up to 100. So just want to clarify that. Last but not least, of the two choices that I just reviewed, in-person and distance learning, as always, our students, our families also have the option to homeschool. But please understand, if you choose this option, this means you are withdrawing your child from school, from Danbury Public Schools. And so all the instructional materials that will be afforded to support families in distance learning are not available for families under homeschooling. So just wanted to clarify that as well. And so some critical next steps for our families. As I mentioned earlier, we will have a program selection form, i.e. survey, that will be released and available for you next week, no later than Tuesday. In that survey, it's going to ask you for a lot of information: your address, your phone number, your student ID number. It's important that that information is filled out correctly. Again, we are aligning this as we get this information. This is helping to inform district decisions around staffing, and district decisions around the materials that will need to be ordered to support students in those two different formats. And so that's why we will be asking and requiring this information. Also asking our families to continue to review the Danbury plan and review the Danbury website. Look at the Danbury Public Schools website for any updates regarding the plan. Certainly, after we have a board meeting next Wednesday on the 22nd, at that board meeting, the current draft plan will be updated, and we'll be looking to incorporate the food back where applicable and appropriate in the plan. And doing the necessary cleaning up to make sure it's ready for the board and the community as a final document. Addition, as Dr. Sal had mentioned earlier, he has made a petition to the state, and certainly any updates that might be available, we'll be sharing them through our typical correspondence and emails. But there may be also some information also available on our website. So we ask you to please, stay tuned and continue to monitor the website for any updates. And so, Dr. Sal, at this time, just going to ask you if you have any closing thoughts for our families. Just want to also remind the families, if you have not had an opportunity to do so yet, please find some time to include your questions, concerns, comments, recommendations in our FAQ sheet. The team and I will certainly take some time to review them and incorporate updates where appropriate and where we can. So thanks again. Dr. Sal?
Yeah. I've been muted this whole time. Am I on? No, I just want to make sure. Great job. Thank you.
You're there.
Yeah, I know that I'm sure there's so many questions.
Absolutely.
As we work through these details, parents understand that the application that we give to the state, it's not a want, it's a requirement, and we gotta make a good faith effort to do it. Some of the things in there that we've been toying with and listening, we've done hearings with students, with parents, twice with parents, with other focus groups, with our health folks, town individuals, the architect and engineer going around your district, looking at the ventilation, looking at, Danbury's got buildings that need just the normal times needs assistance with ventilation and no air conditioning. So I'm very, very concerned. I'm concerned about the youngsters keeping those masks on all morning long, all day long. So some of the things I'm thinking about, and I'm going to share them with you now. I'm trying to put this through what I call a funnel. It's all coming into the funnel. Now it's coming down to that little bottom as I think about on this scale, what can I do? I mean, I'm thinking it might be a good idea for some early dismissals if for the first month to evaluate the situation. If the state doesn't give us the hybrid, that even when we in our phase one, perhaps we do that. Parents have been used to that 1 hour delay dismissal. Might be a 2 hour one, which would enable us to maybe ease into this, educate all the youngsters, have them in front of us, do a grab and go, because gathering and eating in the rooms is awful difficult. We will not know how many parents are actually not sending their children. So I just think that gives us time to breathe and ease in. That's assuming the hybrid model isn't approved. And like I said, I know there's board members. I see a number of them on here that are advocating and trying to help us get that, and the mayor. But if in fact we got to go back, well, maybe we go back with less students because of parents who want to drive them. We have an early dismissal, which would permit the youngsters to have some breaks, and maybe school be a little more normal what we offer them. And we move down that road, and then he reevaluated towards the end of September, going in October. At least pitch the state, telling them too difficult to occupy the schools, and the lack of air conditioning and facilities to come back safely. So we're doing that. The curriculum, at the beginning I mentioned, we're going to invest in distance learning. We had an okay program. It's got to be a stronger program, and that will be a big investment, particularly at the secondary level. The youngsters with credit-bearing courses, they have college applications, a lot of things on the line. So we want to strengthen that. Parents ask me, how are we going to keep the washrooms clean? Well, we're going to use some of the money we set aside initially is around close to 1.9 million. We're looking at some other grants to bring folks in to be there present during the day to do cleaning in the washrooms and high traffic areas. We'll be doing those things. We need assistance outside of parents for safety in terms of dropping off students. There are a lot of things going on that if we did the hybrid, it just cuts everything in half. We still have to do many of the things I'm speaking about, but the mitigations would be at a different level. So please understand your questions to us help us define what it is that we need to do. And as I said a while ago, my highest priority is safety, and we'll follow the experts, and we'll work with our town officials in implementing those initiatives. So I want to thank you for being here this evening. Send your questions, and some of you had some good ideas in solving some of them. I love those as well, and we'll put it together and talk with the board. It's a workshop. The board's input would help me define the plan somewhat, which is due on Friday on the 24th. Kevin, thank you for all you've done, and I thank all the parents and board members who are here and town officials for listening in, because our children need all of us, particularly at this time. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Sal. Have a good evening, everyone.